As the wife of Sir Christopher Meyer, former UK ambassador to the United States, Baroness Catherine Meyer was witness to some of the most historic moments in our shared history. But she has a story of her own, fighting for access to her children and supporting other parents who have experienced child abduction. In this episode of Her Voice in the House, Baroness Meyer shares her remarkable story and how she is using her platform in the Lords to speak out on some of the most important issues facing our country. Welcome, Baroness Meyer, Catherine Meyer, to Her Voice in the House. Thank you for joining us today. I wonder if you could kick off just by introducing yourself, share a bit about your background and the defining moment that led you to where you are today in the House of Lords.
Hello, and thank you for interviewing me. My name is Catherine Meyer, and I'm a Conservative member of the House of Lords. And I've been appointed in 2018 by Theresa May. And I take much pride in that because she actually sent very few people to the House of Lords. And so I take that as a great compliment, though I always think that, in fact, Christopher, my husband, should have been here more than I should have been here. But there we are. And unfortunately, Christopher died 2 years ago. So I can continue to do what he would have wanted to do.
Yeah, definitely a continuation of public service. I think some of our listeners will be aware about your personal story and your experience of parental child abduction and your work in that area campaigning not only for your personal case but for other parents who are going through or have gone through a similar trauma. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about that journey, how that shaped who you are, and perhaps any advice you can offer to listeners who, whatever personal struggle they're facing, that They can find from your story.
Well, as you say, I mean, my professional life started actually in the city, in finances. And along the road, I got married to a German, and we moved to Germany, and the marriage didn't work out. And so we decided to separate. I had custody of the children. I came back with the children to London to continue because they were at the French lycée, and the children were going to see their father during every summer and winter, basically during all the holidays, because I was very keen that they keep contact with both parents, and also they were bilingual, so that was quite an important point for them and for their future. And so I sent them on holiday 1 year. And a few days before they were due to return, I got a letter saying I'm not sending them back. And hence became a horror story that lasted 9 years. During 9 years, I was separated from my children. I was only able to see them 24 hours in total over 9 years. And it was a fight that was awful because you don't sort of suddenly say, okay, it's fine, I can't see my children, and I agree to that, or I abandon my fight. So what I did everything I could to try and get the German courts to actually behave and let me see my children. And most people, when they heard my story, they just couldn't believe it. They say, but how did it happen? Isn't there any law that protects you? And the point is that there are laws. I mean, my children were wards of courts. The High Court of England and Wales ordered the immediate return of the children to the United Kingdom so that we could then decide more clearly what custody arrangement we needed to do. But my ex-husband did not abide by the High Court's order, and in fact he ran away and with the children and went to a superior court, and they reversed the English court's decision. And after that, every time I tried to apply for just access to my children, the German court said, no, you can't see them, it would be too traumatic now that they are adapted to their new environment. It would be too traumatic for them to see you. It's not in their best interest, and that was it. And through this, I'm not talking about the emotional side because it's impossible to describe how it is to lose your children in such a sort of horrible way, unnecessary way. And I couldn't contact them. If I wrote to them, I don't know if they received the letters. Then the German court sort of accused me of harassing my children by writing to them, and other parents who would be accused of not writing to their children and therefore they're bad parents. So it was always, everything was changed to benefit the idea that the courts wanted to keep the children. So people didn't believe me at first, and then when they started realizing what was going on, I got, in fact, it was at that time, it was quite a big story. I was in the newspapers, I was interviewed on television, and through that, other parents started to contact me, and I realized that I was not alone. This is something that happens. International parental abduction happens. And so I also went to lobby the French government because I have a French passport, so do my children. Went to see several members of parliament, many of whom were very supportive. There were questions in the House of Commons. And through that, I also went to lobby our ambassador. And I met the previous ambassador, and then suddenly there was this new ambassador called Christopher Meyer. And a few members of parliament said to me, you must go and see him because I'm sure he might be able to help you. And so I decided to go and see Christopher Meyer in Germany. He, at that time, had heard about my story because, in fact, before he was sent to Germany, he had to go through in front of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and they raised my case, and they said, what are you going to do about Catherine Lyle's case? And so Christopher knew about it. He didn't know what to do, so he wrote to the Foreign Office, say, what shall I do about this woman? I cannot not see her, otherwise they'll say terrible person who refuses to see women in distress. And by the time I went to see him, it was about in April, and he had been in Bonn for only a few months, and he was single. He had been separated from his wife, and I always say there was a queue of women sort of waiting for this new ambassador to arrive, and he was a rather good-looking ambassador, so I think there were a lot of women there. And for some extraordinary reason, the moment he saw me and the moment we started speaking, he decided I was the one. And I was not at that time in a very positive place towards men. And so I thought either he's mad or he's an amazing person. But I thought he's probably mad, wanting to get involved with a woman who had a serious problem with the German judiciary. I was also in the German newspapers, and the Germans did not like all this publicity against their judicial system. So we started seeing each other, and I thought this is going to get very complicated. And for me, going to Germany was really, really difficult because I was going to, in a way, enemy territory and so close to where my children could be, and I couldn't see them. And what happened was that Tony Blair got elected, and the ambassador to the United States retired, and he took a post in London. And so there was a vacancy, and Tony Blair decided to send Christopher. And so there we were, and Christopher decided, I'm not going to Washington without Catherine. He got his divorce on a Wednesday. We got married on a Friday, and we flew to Washington on a Saturday, on Halloween. And it was extraordinary to arrive in Washington like that. But Christopher, at first, he couldn't believe my story, and he said, you must have had a bad lawyer. I'm a diplomat. I'm also separated with children. I'm sure we can sort it out. And as he got into my case and realized, and we worked for 9 years really on my case, if you were to interview him, he would be much more ruder about how I was treated. He was absolutely outraged. And so were many people, that I couldn't see my children. I mean, it's terrible. And so the advice I give to people is don't give up, fight, because at the end of the day, first of all, children are more resilient than one thinks. And as much as you dislike the other partner or the ex, never really vilify them, because whatever happens, my ex-husband is still the father of my children. And so I always criticize the German judiciary system, Germany in general as well, because their diplomats did not help me either. But I tried never to say anything bad against my ex-husband because I thought this is not right for the children. You know, I may have my own feelings, but that was separate. And so never give up, keep hope. And hope, I thought at one stage there was no hope. And, you know, it was really it was very difficult times in my life. But one day when Alexander became of age, when he was 18, we were back in London, and I was walking on the streets of London, and my phone rang, and it was Alexander. Hello, maman. And so it took a very long time to rekindle a normal, proper, loving relationship, but we got there, and we're very close. And those separation made us different people, obviously, but I think it made us, the three of us, stronger people. And so there was an ending to it. But what a shame, what a terrible shame for the children who never visited Washington, who never had the opportunity that I had and would have wanted to share with them.
Wow, what a story. Question that I didn't sort of put to you before, but just listening to what you're saying there, to what extent then do you believe fate had a part in your journey in that next chapter of your life? So meeting Christopher and obviously working together in your cause, but then also the next chapter of your life, moving to Washington. Looking back now, reflecting on that time, that fate had a hand in.
I would say fate moves in very mysterious ways, and sometimes when you least believe it, least expect it, things happen. Christopher was really the silver lining in this terrible, terrible black cloud, and he was the love of my life, and he was an amazing person who I admired and loved very much. And I never imagined, after a very unhappy previous marriage, that this could ever happen. And then I even less imagined that the children would survive, that they would turn around, and that we would be able to create a good relationship. But it took a lot of patience to rekindle a good relationship, a lot of understanding, a lot of ups and downs. And Christopher used to get so upset because my children, and particularly the younger one, were so alienated against me that they ended up being actually quite cruel. And not because they wanted to be cruel, but because they were told probably horrible things about me. And so, you know, if you're a child and you're taken away from one of your parents, you sort of think to yourself, well, if Mummy really loved us, she'd be here. And I wasn't there. I wasn't there for 9 years. I wasn't there when they cried at night. I wasn't there when it was Mother's Day and they had to do a drawing. So the hurt that you have thinking of how your children are going to be affected, how they're going to survive, it was difficult to deal with. But now they're fantastic and we're very close.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
Happy ending.
Yes.
Great. So another happy time for you was when you moved to Washington.
Yeah.
Many happy times, many challenging times as well, particularly that moment in history now we look back between 1997 to 2003. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about that experience, the highs and the lows, and some of those momentous world events that you encountered. I in other interviews you've done, you said you arrived with Monica Lewinsky and you left with Saddam Hussein. Which
exactly.
Is, well, that's
it
two polar opposites there,
exactly. Right? It gives you sort of a good time in history.
Yes,
1997, Monica Lewinsky, and we left just before the Iraq War.
Yeah.
But I mean, Washington was a roller coaster. I mean, I was sitting on the plane with Christopher, who I didn't know that well. I mean, we've been dating not that long, and we've been dating sort of back and forth, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do as the British ambassador's wife. And then I used to ask Christopher later, I said, but weren't you worried? And he said, no, never worried. And I knew you would be like duck to water. And in some ways I was, because we arrived and we were in love and it was very obvious. And the Americans love a romantic story, so they really liked us. And then obviously my story did come out, and in America also I was in a lot of newspapers. I did interviews everywhere, Charlie Rose, Christiana Menpour, Barbara Walters, I mean, you name it. And
the greats of broadcasting.
Yes. Now, I had a lot of support, and that's why I really have this very, very warm feeling towards America, because they have been amazing. I mean, I used to, for instance, been invited to give a speech about child abduction, because there are two people who didn't quite realize. And after I gave my speech, people would come up and say, "How can we help you?" Which is so American, you know. They like a fighter. They like the people who are standing up and fighting for what is right, and they also have a big heart. And so that was really, really heartwarming, and I think it helped me a lot. And Christopher was also quite implicated in my story, and with the legal side as well. And because of all this media attention that I garnered, I started having American parents writing to me. And there were many, because there were many American men who had married a German woman. Many of them had been posted to Germany because they still had a occupational zone. And so that's how I ended up creating my non-profit organization called PACT, Parents and Abducted Children Together. I testified in the Senate, I testified in the House of Congress, and we managed to actually change a few things. So it was a big fight. As for Washington, because that was one side, this fight was one side of my life, but the other side of my life was being an ambassador's wife. And that was also very demanding, fascinating. I always was interested in politics, so being in Washington was incredibly exciting and interesting. And Christopher was amazing, because he immediately introduced me to his team and said, "This is my wife, and she comes with me." I always say that Christopher was not the ambassador to Washington, he was the ambassador to the United States. The thing was that when I was in Washington, I basically had two lives. On one hand, I was fighting to try and regain access to my children, and fighting for other parents and for the cause in general. And that's how I started a non-profit organization, and that kept me incredibly busy. And separately, I was also the wife of the ambassador. And that was also a very demanding role. We were very busy. We were hosting lots of dinners, lots of receptions for various non-profit organizations, for judges who come and visit, for member of parliament who come and visit, and also, of course, lobbying the Americans to make them better understand Great Britain, to seal the contact between Number 10 and the White House. But we also traveled a lot, because Washington is the capital, but Christopher was the ambassador to the United States, meaning that there are many other places we had to visit. And so I think during our time, we had something like 55,000 people through the house. No wonder I can't remember anybody's name.
No.
And we traveled to basically all the states except 3. So it was basically, it was 24/7, and very few times on our own. And sometimes in Washington, you go out to dinner, and the Americans are quite funny, so we decided just to go out to dinner, the two of us, and then somebody would come up, say, "Oh, are you the British ambassador?" And so, but I mean, very sweet. But sometimes you did want to have a little bit more time to yourselves.
Yeah, and I guess experience America on your own terms.
Yeah.
You know. So I think some of the key defining moments, obviously 9/11, the Iraq War, perhaps you could talk a little bit about those experiences and how you dealt with them, not only on behalf of Brits in the US, but how you dealt with it personally.
Well, we had a lot of different, during that period, it was actually quite incredible how many things happened. From the Good Friday Agreement to, we went to the convention, both conventions, wonderful. I mean, such an experience. And Americans really know how to do it. When you come back to England and you go to our little conventions, It's got nothing to do with America.
A bit different than going to Conservative Party conference in Manchester,
Yes, rather different indeed. There you have balloons, and I mean, it's extraordinary. And then we had the elections, because we arrived when Clinton was in power. And as I said, we arrived a week before the Monica Lewinsky scandal imploded. And there was this real sort of serious thing. Is Clinton going to survive? And so during that time, it was also, we didn't know, because there were more stories coming out. And then he had to testify in court. And so there was... And Christopher was very busy because he was reporting back to London. People would ask, is Clinton going to survive?
Yeah.
So he came. And one of the things, then we had the elections, and Christopher kept on telling London, it's not necessarily going to be a Democrat win. I think that Bush might win. And Number 10 didn't quite believe him. But thanks to Christopher, we really opened the doors, and we had quite a good relationship with the Bushes. Mm-hmm. We went to see George W. when he was governor of Texas. I'm actually an honorary member of Texas. And so the moment that we had the elections and the recount and the hanging chads and all this, I mean, it was quite extraordinary. And then very soon afterwards, actually, it was 9/11. And I remember very clearly, it was a beautiful day. And John Major was staying with us. And the night before, Christopher, John Major were having a drink. And then separately, Condoleezza Rice came to talk to Christopher. And I was there to have having a drink with them before they started talking more serious conversations, which are more secret. And we all sort of said how extraordinary that the month of August nothing happened, and they started listing all the events in the world that happened in August. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, the next day it was 9/11, and it was the most horrific time. And we were pretty close, and Christopher had to run back to the office, send people home. There was great panic, and it was the most interesting, or the most, impressive moment was suddenly everything was quiet, because they stopped. There were no plane flying. I mean, it was just like eerie. Mm. And quite soon afterwards, we went to New York. I think we went maybe 4 days afterwards, and to meet and say hello to the staff of the consulate. And they had the most horrific time, because they had to go to Ground Zero, try and find the Brits. I mean, it was the most extraordinary and poignant moment that I think nobody can ever forget. And so we went to New York several times, and then actually Prince Andrew, now no longer Prince, came to New York as well. And before that, we had our Prime Minister and Cherie Blair came to New York. Anyway, it was just very, very traumatic, and amazing how America and how the Americans sort of went through it. I remember going to the place where people were walking around with photographs of their children, their friends, their husbands, how long it took to actually manage to get the DNA. And then typically Americans, they picked themselves up and on they went. And so that was extraordinary. But then we had a lot of other events leading up to the Iraq War. And that's when Christopher and I left Washington and we returned to London.
That, I guess, leads us on to the next chapter of your life, so fast forwarding a little bit. So you're becoming a member of the House of Lords. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about what you most enjoy about being a peer and some of the issues that you're taking forward and speaking on at this current time.
I enjoy working in such a beautiful, beautiful place. And it's a little bit like the embassy. Our embassy in Washington is beautiful. It was a Lutyens building, and which I spent a lot of time redecorating. And but once you work somewhere, you sort of forget. You don't see it anymore. And sometimes I have to stop. And it's particularly when I'm greeting visitors and they're in awe of this building and the place that you suddenly remind yourself, but isn't this an extraordinary place? So I think that is fantastic. The second thing I love, but that's me, and I've always been like that, and my previous job in the city was like that, is the freedom. I can actually choose which subjects I want to get involved in. And I choose subjects that are close to, that like sometimes it's moral issues, sometimes, I mean, first of all, I'm very much a conservative. So at the moment, there are a lot of subjects for me to talk on. I mean,
Spoiled for choice at the moment.
yeah, absolutely. And some of those pieces of legislations that are coming through to our house, I find them terrible. So, for instance, on the economy, I think that what this government is doing is really going to be very, very damaging to the British economy. I mean, we talked about pubs, we talk about the retail industry, we talk about hotels, and I mean, it is, and those people are really suffering, and those small businesses are going to close. And the result is that a lot of people are leaving the country. I mean, the Labour government keeps on saying nobody's leaving, but it's there. Statistics. The non-doms, most of them have left. You may hate the rich, but actually, first of all, hating people is so stupid because it doesn't bring you anything positive in your life, and it creates anger in your heart. But also, okay, they're rich, but some of them worked very hard. Some of them are very lucky. But we need them because they pay taxes. And then the problem is now you have young people are leaving. I know quite a lot of young people who are going to Abu Dhabi, Dubai, young entrepreneurs. So we're having a brain drain. And but the government is incapable of actually realizing this because they are so entrenched in ideology, and the ideology for me that is incredibly negative. Instead of the ideology like Margaret Thatcher of you can do it. You know, if you apply yourself, if you work hard, you can do it. But as a government, we will also protect the vulnerable. Yeah. But here, there is no incentive for anybody to want to do better. And so I find that really damaging. I spoke on the Chagos bill, which I find is an outrage. A government that talks about human rights. A prime minister who is a human rights lawyer is actually pushing this piece of legislation and doing this treaty without the Chagosian people having a say in the future of their island. This is, I can't even begin to use words on what I think. I feel really sorry for them, and I feel as somebody who sits in the House of Lords, I have a duty to stand up and say something. But even in my little voice, I still want to be on the record to support them. You know, and then the other issue I was very involved with, and Anne Jenkin, who has been an absolute star and a leader here, is this whole stuff of pumping children with puberty blockers. I see this as the medical scandal of this generation. I have a lot of gay friends, and I can tell you, all my gay friends find this also horrific. If you're gay, you're attracted to somebody of the same sex. But actually telling a child that he can or she can change sex reminds me of a part of history we don't want to be reminded of, because actually the first doctor who actually did something like that was in that country, in that part of history. So I rest my case.
And you mentioned about leaders, and I would be really interested to find out what leadership means to you.
Well, I think leadership, I mean, I saw, when I was young, the first person I saw as a leader was Lady Thatcher.
Would you say she's one of your role models?
Oh, definitely. I mean, Great. If I were a 100th of who she was, I would be incredibly, incredibly lucky. I mean, first of all, she had a huge brain, which does help. She was she worked incredibly hard, knew all the details, and she knew what she was doing, and she knew where she was going. But she listened. And one thing, I know a lot of people who knew her personally. I mean, I met her because she and Dennis came to Washington when they were retired. But people who used to work for her or with her always said at cabinet meetings, she used to ask everybody's opinion, listen, and then make up her own mind. And my other role model was actually Christopher, and he was a role model I had in front of me. Same thing, he was very attentive to other people, but he commanded respect because they knew that, and like Margaret Thatcher, they were both very loyal to their staff. And so the staff always felt confident. They knew they could go in and speak to Christopher anytime they had a problem. But he was loyal and firm, and they knew where he stood. And he was demanding, like Margaret Thatcher. You know, you have to deliver.
But I think that's important.
Yeah.
And I think people actually respect that.
Yeah.
In whatever field that you're operating in, if you sort of come around the room, you have a presence, but you're true to what you believe. And I think actually that's what people are looking for in their politicians, and they're public servants, aren't they?
Absolutely.
And I think that's actually a very good trait to have. And you're a female member of the House of Lords, and this podcast, Her Voice in the House, is spotlighting your voices. Well, do you feel any particular pressure to perform as a female woman in the House of Lords? But also, when you look at women in politics now, how do you think that they are dealing with the challenges that are put to them in by the media or male politicians, or actually constituents who perhaps take a dislike to seeing women in positions of authority and office?
Well, I think in some ways I would say get a life.
Good.
It sounds rude, but I think we are who we are, and we are women and they are men, and we're different. I'm half French, and in France you say vive la différence. When I started in the city, which was many moons ago, actually, I was thinking it was half a century ago, 50 years ago. And I was working at one stage with Mary Lynch and E.F. Hutton, and there were no women in my business. I think there were 5 women commodity brokers in London, and it was really difficult. I mean, there was discrimination, you were put down. I mean, it's everything that people had to fight. And I was one of the ones who fought hard also for women's liberation in that sense. I wanted to be treated at work equally, but also not be constantly harassed and usually sexually harassed as well. So there needed to be a change, and I think the evolution was good, but I now fear that the pendulum has gone completely too much the other way. And so much so that actually women's life now, I think, is more difficult because they need to really compete against men as if they were men. As being a woman, you actually do have some advantages. And the other thing I don't like is now, because there's all this pressure, there is a culture of anxiety and self-censorship, that men are afraid to say something, they're afraid to open a door. And so all this chivalry doesn't exist anymore. And I think that we needed change, we needed evolution. It was tough then, but I think now it's gone a little bit too much the other way. And I feel sorry for boys. I mean, I have 2 sons, and I think that now being a male is actually quite difficult. And for instance, the people again who I admire, one is Lady Thatcher. Well, I could put the Queen first. Queen Elizabeth II, Lady Thatcher, Christine Lagarde, Madeleine Albright, all strong, tough women who actually got to the top, but they were women. Christine Lagarde, you look at her, I mean, the way she dresses, she looks fantastic.
She has a presence.
She has a presence. Yeah. She didn't have to change sex to make it. No. And some women, they go like this and push, push, push. I think I want women to succeed as women, because that is my hero, and that is heroic to be able to do that.
Fantastic. I couldn't disagree with you at all on any of that. So looking back on your, amazing life really, and the story that you shared with us today, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think that, I had too strict a education. My parents were incredibly strict, which in some ways was good because I think it helped me actually manage what, challenges I've been through by losing my children. So I didn't sort of start feeling sorry for myself because I was brought up never to feel sorry for yourself. And I went on and fought on. And so I think that's good. But through that overly strict education, I think they also a little bit undermined my self-confidence and self-esteem. And I wish I had been a little bit more self-confident and not sort of always apologizing or becoming too much of a woman, going when I should have been firmer. Mm-hmm. But that was my self-defense mechanism also of when I think I failed. But I'm very critical of myself, and I think one should be critical, but with a certain balance.
Can you describe the Lords in one word?
Formidable could be the word, but formidable is also, in French, formidable. Mm. And so if formidable can have a bit of the French input into it, so because in English, formidable is a little bit, you're scared of it.
Yeah.
So I would say it is a bit scary. And as I said, even so many years later, I find it scary to speak. But it is formidable because it's the center of democracy. It's where democracy started. It's where you sit and you have people who are incredibly knowledgeable about certain things. And so you're sitting with amazing people.
Well, I think you're one of the amazing people that make up this this chamber.
I don't think so.
So please don't put yourself down. And I'd just like to say a big thank you for joining us on this episode, Catherine. Great to discuss your journey and how you got to here you are today. And hopefully you will want to come back on in a future episode. But thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Please like, subscribe and share the podcast, and get in touch if you have any suggestions on who you'd like us and her voice in the house to feature in a future episode. Thanks so much for listening.